Below, an assembly of U.S. military personnel stood motionless, their ranks impeccably straight, their eyes fixed on the ship. The alien craft landed with a whisper, a contrast to its size and the tension it brought. Its ramp descended, revealing three figures cloaked in a silver-blue sheen, their skin shimmering under the sunlight. Commander Vrak led the way, his elongated features betraying an aura of both intelligence and arrogance. Behind him, Lieutenant Zarl followed with calculated precision, and Cadet Grizz trailed, his eyes scanning the humans with an air of youthful bravado. General Maddox stepped forward, a man whose every wrinkle spoke of battles fought and strategies won. His voice was steady as he greeted the Zixarians. "Welcome to Earth. We hope this meeting marks the beginning of mutual understanding and cooperation." Commander Vrak's lipless mouth curled into what might have been a smile. "Indeed, General, we have observed your species with great interest. Your achievements are impressive, given your primitive origins." The room behind the military formation buzzed with muted whispers. Captain Ryan Bulldog Briggs, a towering figure with a jawline seemingly chiseled from granite, exchanged a glance with his second-in-command, Sergeant Blake Harrow. Briggs muttered under his breath, "This is going to be interesting." The initial pleasantries between the delegation were formal and brief. Vrak wasted little time in addressing their purpose. "We have come to evaluate your planet's military capabilities, specifically the resilience and adaptability of your species. Our own kind excels in intellect and technology, but we find ourselves intrigued by the physical endurance and tenacity you display." General Maddox raised an eyebrow. "We'd be glad to demonstrate what we're capable of. I trust you're prepared for something rigorous." Cadet Grizz stepped forward, his posture exuding confidence. "Our physiology surpasses yours in every measurable way. Your challenges, however extreme, will serve only as a study in inefficiency." Captain Briggs smirked. "Well then, gentlemen, welcome to Navy SEAL Boot Camp." The decision to have the Zixarians participate in SEAL training came swiftly. It was the perfect stage to show Earth's finest warriors in action. The aliens, despite their advanced neural enhancements and superior intellect, seemed wholly confident in their ability to dominate the program. Briggs noted their expressions as they arrived at the SEAL training grounds the next day, a mix of curiosity and dismissive amusement. The sprawling base lay along the coast, a punishing landscape of rocky beaches, frigid waters, and obstacle courses that seemed designed by someone with a grudge against humanity. The air smelled of salt and determination. Human trainees were already running drills, their muscles taut with exertion, their faces masks of resolve. "First impressions?" Briggs asked, turning to Vrak. Vrak surveyed the scene, his sharp, crystalline eyes calculating. "Primitive," he said, almost bored, "but we shall see." Briggs clapped his hands. "All right, listen up. This isn't a show and tell. You're about to experience the hardest military training program on the planet. Drop the smug looks and get ready to sweat." The first challenge was simple by SEAL standards, a physical fitness test. Push-ups, sit-ups, and a timed mile run. The humans completed the drills with practiced discipline, their bodies conditioned for the grind. The Zixarians, however, found themselves floundering in Earth's gravity. Cadet Grizz, who had boasted the loudest, managed only 3 shaky push-ups before collapsing into the sand. "I was unprepared for the gravitational anomaly," he muttered, his silver sheen dimming with embarrassment. Sergeant Harrow leaned toward Briggs. "Looks like our visitors bit off more than they can chew." By the end of the first round of exercises, it was clear the aliens were out of their depth. Their neural enhancements gave them strategic advantages in combat simulations, but offered no aid when it came to raw physical exertion. Lieutenant Zarl, who had maintained an air of stoicism, was visibly winded after the mile run. As the day wore on, the gap between human and alien endurance widened. Water drills posed an entirely new challenge for the Zixarians. Used to their low-gravity aquatic simulations, they struggled against the unrelenting waves of the Pacific. Commander Vrak, pride bruised but unbroken, found himself humbled during a drown-proofing exercise where human trainees, arms and legs bound, floated and swam with an ease that defied logic. "Your species is stubborn," Vrack admitted to Briggs after being hauled out of the water for the third time. Briggs laughed, a deep, gravelly sound. "We call it grit." By the end of the first day, the Zixarian's confidence had cracked, if not completely shattered. Grizz sat on the edge of a bunk in the barracks, his usually bright skin dull. "How do they endure this?" he asked, more to himself than to anyone else. Zarl, seated nearby, responded without looking up. "They are different, more so than we anticipated." Vrack stood in the doorway, his towering form framed by the harsh light of the setting sun. "We underestimated them, but this is not over. Tomorrow, we adapt." The humans, meanwhile, observed their guests with a mix of amusement and respect. Briggs, debriefing his team, leaned back in his chair. "They've got the brains, no doubt about it. But out here, brains only get you so far." Harrow nodded. "Think they'll last a week?" Briggs grinned. "Not a chance. But they'll learn something important before they quit." As night fell, the training grounds grew quiet save for the distant crash of waves and the occasional groan from a Zixarian attempting to recover. Both sides, alien and human, knew the coming days would test not just bodies but wills. And in this crucible of sweat and sand, something unexpected was beginning to take shape. A begrudging respect born of struggle that hinted at a story far from over. The sky over the training grounds darkened with storm clouds as Hell Week officially began. Rain lashed against the cold sand, turning it into a sludge that clung to boots and skin. The whistle blew, sharp and unyielding, cutting through the chaos of the storm. Captain Briggs stood at the center of the beach, his voice like a thunderclap. "This isn't a game. This is where warriors are forged. If you think you've got what it takes, prove it." The human recruits surged forward without hesitation, diving into the frigid waves as if drawn by instinct. The Zixarians hesitated, their advanced neural processors likely calculating every miserable second they were about to endure. Commander Vrack glanced at his team, giving a short nod before they followed, their movements stiff and awkward in comparison to the humans' fluid determination. The first exercise was simple in concept, but brutal in execution. Each trainee was to retrieve a weighted log from the surf and carry it back to the shoreline. For the human recruits, it was a familiar challenge, though still grueling. The Zixarians, however, found themselves outmatched almost immediately. Earth's gravity, compounded by the force of the waves, turned the logs into immovable anchors. Cadet Grizz was the first to falter, his thin limbs trembling under the weight. He let out a guttural growl, his pride pushing him to lift the log again and again, only to collapse into the icy water. "This is impossible," he muttered through clenched teeth, his silver-blue skin losing its usual luster. "You call that effort?" Briggs barked, his boots crunching against the wet sand as he loomed over the struggling alien. "You think the enemy's gonna wait while you complain about impossible? Move it, or quit now." Grizz's eyes burned with defiance, but his body refused to cooperate. It was Lieutenant Zarl who stepped in, grabbing one end of the log and shouldering the burden with him. Together, they stumbled forward, each step an exercise in pain and humiliation. Meanwhile, the humans pushed through the same challenge, their faces etched with exhaustion, but their strides unbroken. Briggs watched them with a critical eye, barking orders and encouragement in equal measure. "Dig deep. Pain is temporary. Failure lasts forever." The Zixarians couldn't help but notice the difference. These humans, who lacked advanced physiology or neural enhancements, carried their burdens with a kind of unrelenting grit that defied logic. Vrack, observing from a distance, couldn't shake the unsettling realization that his team was not just outclassed, but fundamentally unprepared for this kind of trial. As the hours dragged on, the training moved to the infamous obstacle course. Mud pits, high walls, and barbed wire stretched as far as the eye could see. The rain had turned the ground into a treacherous quagmire, making every step a battle. Grizz and Zarl struggled to scale the walls, their elongated limbs more suited for the lower gravity of their homeworld than Earth's punishing demands. Commander Vrak, ever the leader, pushed himself harder, his pride unwilling to let him lag behind his team. It was during the mud crawl that the alien spirits hit their lowest point. The barbed wire hung so low that even the smallest misstep resulted in a painful scrape. Human recruits crawled through the sludge with grim determination, their faces smeared with mud, their eyes locked on the end of the course. The Zixarians, unused to such conditions, moved sluggishly, their bodies faltering under the strain. Grizz let out a frustrated cry as the wire snagged his shoulder, tearing the fabric of his uniform. "Why do you subject yourselves to this barbarism?" he shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. One of the human recruits beside him, barely older than 20, chuckled through gritted teeth. "Because we're not quitters." Grizz glared at him, but the word stuck, lingering in his mind as he forced himself forward. The mud clung to his limbs, pulling him down like a living thing. By the time he reached the end of the course, he collapsed onto his back, gasping for air. Zarl and Vrak joined him moments later, their usually composed features betraying their exhaustion. That night, as the trainees huddled around small fires for warmth, the differences between the two species became starker. The humans shared stories, laughing through their pain and cracking jokes about the day's trials. The Zixarians sat apart, silent and contemplative. Vrak stared into the flames, his pride warring with the reality of their failure. "They thrive on this," Zarl said quietly, breaking the silence between them. "The struggle, the pain, it fuels them." Grizz, still nursing a bruised ego, spat into the dirt. "It's madness." "No," Vrak said, his voice heavy. "It's resilience." The next day brought water-based drills, and the Pacific Ocean proved an unrelenting adversary. The human trainees were pushed to their limits, but they had the advantage of experience. They knew how to fight the waves, how to conserve their energy while maintaining focus. The Zixarians, despite their superior intellect, were undone by the sheer unpredictability of the ocean. The drown-proofing exercise was the ultimate humiliation. Bound at the wrists and ankles, the trainees were thrown into the water and forced to stay afloat, using only their core strength and sheer will. For the humans, it was a test of endurance and mental fortitude. For the Zixarians, it was a nightmare. Commander Vrak managed to stay afloat for a few minutes before succumbing, his body sinking beneath the waves. It was Briggs who hauled him out, shaking his head as the alien coughed up water. "You can't think your way through this, Commander. It's not about strategy or technology. It's about guts." Vrak met his gaze, a flicker of respect in his crystalline eyes. "Your species is more formidable than we anticipated." By the end of the week, the Zixarians were shadows of the confident beings who had first stepped onto Earth's soil. Their bodies bore the marks of the training, the cuts, bruises, and exhaustion that were badges of honor for the humans. But more than that, their minds had been altered. They had come expecting to dominate, to prove their superiority. Instead, they had been humbled. As they sat in the barracks that evening, Grizz broke the silence. "How do they do it?" he asked, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and frustration. "They're not stronger than us. They're not faster. There's something else," Vrak said, his tone thoughtful. "Something we do not yet understand." Outside, Briggs stood with Harrow, watching the storm clouds begin to clear. "Think they'll make it?" Harrow asked. Briggs shrugged, a rare smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Probably not, but they're learning, and that's a start." As the stars emerged one by one, their faint light reflected on the restless waves. The training was far from over, but the lesson had already begun. For all their advancements, the Zixarians were realizing that strength wasn't just a matter of muscle or mind. It was something deeper, something uniquely human. The relentless sun beat down on the training grounds, a rare reprieve from the stormy skies that had marked the first half of Hell Week. The air was thick with the mingling scents of salt water and sweat. For the human recruits, it was just another day to push past their limits. For the Zixarians, it was the moment when the cracks in their confidence threatened to become chasms. Commander Vrak stood at the edge of the obstacle course, his gaze locked on the towering structures before him. His body ached in ways he hadn't known possible, and his pride was fraying under the relentless assault of failure. Yet, as he watched the human trainees work in unison to scale walls and carry logs as a team, he felt a flicker of understanding. They thrived not because they were superior individually, but because they leaned into their collective strength, something the Zixarians had not considered vital. Captain Briggs approached, his shadow falling over Vrak like a challenge. "See something you like, Commander?" His tone was gruff but not without a trace of encouragement. "They work together as if their lives depend on it," Vrak said, his voice measured. "It is intriguing." "It's not just teamwork," Briggs replied. "It's trust. Out here, trust is the difference between life and death. Maybe that's something your fancy tech doesn't teach." Vrak didn't respond, but his silence spoke volumes. The lesson was sinking in, slow but inevitable. The next trial was a simulated rescue mission, a grueling exercise designed to test endurance, coordination, and leadership under pressure. Each team was tasked with retrieving a heavy mannequin from a simulated battlefield, carrying it across uneven terrain, and returning to base within a punishing time limit. The humans divided into their squads with practiced ease, already strategizing their approach. The Zixarians hesitated, their earlier cohesion shaken by their individual struggles. "All right, listen up," Briggs called out, his voice cutting through the chatter. "This isn't about who's the strongest or the fastest. It's about getting the job done. If you can't work together, you fail. Simple as that." The whistle blew, and chaos erupted. The humans moved like a well-oiled machine, hoisting their mannequins with grunts of effort but no hesitation. Meanwhile, the Zixarians faltered. Grizz tried to lift the mannequin alone, his pride still stinging from previous failures. The weight was too much, and he stumbled, nearly toppling into the dirt. "Let me help," Zal said, stepping forward. "I can do it," Grizz snapped, his voice laced with frustration. "No, you can't," Vrak ejected, his tone sharp but not unkind. "And that is not a weakness. It is a fact. We do this together, or not at all." For the first time, Grizz relented, stepping back as Zarl and Vrak joined him. Together, they heaved the mannequin onto their shoulders, their movements awkward but unified. The terrain was merciless, each step a battle against gravity and exhaustion, but the Zixarians pushed forward, driven by a determination that hadn't been there before. Watching from a distance, Briggs nodded to himself. "They're starting to get it," he said to Harrow. "They've got a long way to go," Harrow replied, crossing his arms. "But yeah, they're learning." The Zixarians weren't the only ones facing revelations. As they struggled through the course, the human trainees began to notice their efforts. One recruit, a wiry young man named Jackson, jogged alongside them for a brief stretch, offering words of encouragement. "You've got this. Just keep moving." Grizz looked at him, bewildered. "Why would you help your competition?" Jackson shrugged, a lopsided grin on his face. "Because out there, it's not about winning. It's about survival. And if we're in the field together, I want to know you've got my back." The word struck a chord with Grizz, who had always seen strength as a solitary endeavor. His pace quickened, his focus sharpening. The mannequin felt lighter. Not because the burden had lessened, but because it was no longer his alone to carry. By the time they reached the finish line, the Zixarians were drenched in sweat and barely standing, but they had completed the exercise as a team. The human recruits greeted them with nods of respect, a silent acknowledgement of their effort. For the first time, the line between alien and human felt less like a barrier and more like a challenge to be overcome. That evening, the mood in the barracks was different. The humans and Zixarians mingled, sharing stories and laughter in a way that would have been unthinkable just days earlier. Grizz found himself sitting beside Jackson, who was demonstrating how to tie a knot used in survival situations. "It's simple," Jackson said, his hands moving with practiced ease. "Just loop it here, pull it through, and there you go." Grizz tried to mimic the motion, fumbling at first but eventually succeeding. He looked at the completed knot with a mixture of pride and disbelief. "Why do you do this?" "Teach me. Jackson shrugged again. "Because one day, it might save your life. And out here, that's all that matters." Across the room, Vrack and Briggs shared a quieter moment. The commander's usually stiff posture had softened, and there was a hint of something almost like gratitude in his expression. "You were right about trust," Vrack admitted. "It is not something we value as you do, but I am beginning to see its power." Briggs gave a small nod. "It's what makes us human, and if you stick with it, it might just make you stronger." The night ended with an air of quiet camaraderie. The Zixarians were far from mastering the challenges of SEAL training, but they were beginning to understand the mindset that drove their human counterparts. It wasn't about raw strength or intellect. It was about heart, about the willingness to endure not for oneself, but for the team. As the lights dimmed and the barracks fell silent, Vrack lay awake, staring at the ceiling. His body ached, his pride was bruised, but for the first time since arriving on Earth, he felt a spark of something new: hope. The humans were unlike any species he had encountered, and their resilience was a puzzle he was determined to solve. Tomorrow would bring more trials, more pain, but also more opportunities to grow. The turning point had come, and with it, the realization that the path forward was not about proving superiority, but about learning what it truly meant to endure. The final day of training arrived like a quiet dawn after a storm. The weeks of grueling exercises had worn away all pretense, leaving the Zixarians and their human counterparts stripped down to their raw selves. What remained was not rivalry but respect, forged in shared suffering and unyielding persistence. Commander Vrack stood in formation with his team, their once pristine uniforms now tattered and marked with the scars of training. The humans stood beside them, equally worn but radiating a quiet confidence. Captain Briggs paced before the group, his piercing gaze sweeping over the trainees. "Hell Week is over," he began, his voice carrying across the open field. "Not all of you made it. Those who did, you've earned the right to call yourselves resilient. But resilience doesn't mean perfection. It means learning, adapting, and standing tall after every fall." Vrack met Briggs's gaze, the words sinking deep. He had fallen countless times during the training, both literally and figuratively. Each misstep, every failure, had threatened to shatter his pride. Yet here he stood, shoulder to shoulder with beings who had once seemed so alien. Now, they felt almost like comrades. The final exercise had been the most punishing of all, a simulated mission that required navigation, endurance, and teamwork to succeed. For the Zixarians, it had been a culmination of every lesson they had struggled to learn. Vrack had taken the lead, not with commands but with collaboration, listening to the input of his team, and even seeking advice from the humans. It was a strategy born not of logic, but of trust. The mission had been a grueling march through dense terrain, carrying supplies and coordinating tactics under the relentless pressure of a ticking clock. Grizz, who had once bristled at the idea of sharing his burdens, had worked side by side with Zarl to haul their gear. Vrack had relied on human recruits like Jackson to navigate Earth's unpredictable landscape, their instincts proving invaluable where technology failed. When they reached the extraction point, the sense of accomplishment had been overwhelming. It wasn't just that they had completed the mission, it was that they had done so together as a unit. The humans had cheered, their camaraderie infectious, and even the typically reserved Zixarians had allowed themselves a moment of pride. Now, as Briggs concluded his speech, the weight of the experience settled over them. "This isn't the end," he said. "For some of you, this is just the beginning. But whatever path you take from here, remember this: strength isn't just what you're born with. It's what you build, and it's never built alone. Later, As the trainees gathered for a modest ceremony marking the end of their ordeal, Vrak found himself standing beside Briggs. The commander's crystalline eyes reflected the setting sun, a mix of gratitude and something deeper, understanding. "You humans are remarkable," Vrak said, his voice quieter than usual. "Your strength defies logic, yet it is undeniable." "I underestimated it," Briggs smirked, crossing his arms. "You're not the first, and you won't be the last. But I've got to admit, you and your team didn't quit. That counts for something." "It counts for everything," Vrak replied, his tone sincere. "We came here seeking to prove ourselves superior. Instead, we've learned that strength is not a solitary trait, but a shared one. It is born from struggle, from unity, and from resilience." Grizz approached, his expression uncharacteristically open. "Commander," he began hesitantly, "I wanted to say, I understand now why they do this, why they endure." Vrak placed a hand on Grizz's shoulder, a gesture he had learned from watching the humans. "As do I." The evening culminated in an informal gathering around a bonfire. Humans and Zixarians shared food, stories, and laughter. The barriers between them dissolved. Jackson showed Grizz how to roast marshmallows, laughing as the aliens struggled to keep the sugary treat from catching fire. Zal engaged in a spirited debate with Harrow about the relative merits of Earth's military tactics versus Zixarian strategy. Even Vrak found himself relaxing, the weight of his pride replaced by a quiet contentment. As the fire burned low, Briggs approached Vrak one final time. "So, what's next for you and your crew? Heading back to your world?" Vrak nodded. "Yes, there is much to share with our people, much to reconsider. This experience has changed us in ways I did not anticipate." Briggs chuckled. "That's what Hell Week does. It doesn't just test you, it transforms you." As dawn broke over the horizon, the Zixarians prepared to depart. Their ship, sleek and otherworldly, awaited them on the tarmac. The human recruits gathered to see them off, their faces a mix of camaraderie and curiosity. Vrak turned to address Briggs one last time. "Captain, you and your men have shown us what it means to be strong in ways we could not have imagined. For that, we are in your debt." Briggs extended a hand, a gesture Vrak now understood and reciprocated without hesitation. "You're not in our debt, Commander. You earned this. And who knows? Maybe one day, we'll need you to teach us a thing or two." Vrak allowed himself a rare smile. "Perhaps. But for now, we have much to learn." The Zixarians boarded their ship, the hum of its engines rising as they prepared for takeoff. As they ascended into the sky, the humans below watched in silence, their expressions thoughtful. Inside the ship, Grizz spoke what they were all thinking. "Do you think they'll remember us as we remember them?" "They will," Vrak said with certainty, "because we are not so different, and that knowledge will endure." As the stars swallowed their vessel, the lessons of Earth remained etched in their minds. They had come seeking superiority, but departed with something far greater, a deeper understanding of resilience, camaraderie, and what it truly meant to endure.